Anne was excited as she left the supermarket, her bags full of groceries for a festive dinner to celebrate her 40th birthday. Her heart was light with the joy of spending time with close friends. But in an instant, everything changed. A sudden accident, an unexpected conversation, and a series of events would lead her life down a path she never imagined. From the happiness of planning a celebration to the crushing realization of betrayal, Anne's world seemed to collapse. Yet in the depths of despair, she found the strength to rebuild her life, discovering new love, a new family, and a happiness she never thought possible. Anne's journey shows that even in the darkest moments, life can surprise us with unexpected joys. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Anne exited the bustling supermarket, her arms laden with bags brimming with groceries. Her mind raced with thoughts of the evening ahead, a special occasion she had meticulously planned for weeks. Tonight was her 40th birthday, and she was eager to host a warm, intimate dinner with only her closest friends and their families. Her heart fluttered with excitement as she imagined the laughter and joy that would fill her home. But as she stepped off the sidewalk and into the parking lot, her thoughts were violently interrupted. A sudden, jarring force struck her from behind, sending her sprawling to the unforgiving asphalt. Her bags burst open upon impact, their contents scattering across the pavement in a chaotic mess. A sharp cry escaped her lips, a mixture of pain and shock as she tried to process what had just happened. "Dear God, I didn't see you. Where did you even come from?" a voice, filled with panic, called out. Anne looked up to see a man hurrying toward her, his face pale with fear and regret. He reached out to help her to her feet, his hands trembling. "You almost ran me over," Anne spat out, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "Who lets people like you drive?" She clutched her throbbing hand, the sting of the fall still fresh. The man recoiled at her words, but after a brief pause, he softened. "You're right. I should have been more careful. But you should have been paying attention too," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. Anne shot him a fierce, fiery glare that made him shrink back. Sensing the tension, he quickly backtracked, his tone more conciliatory. "I'm sorry, truly. Let me make it up to you. Please let me help you get home. I'll gather your things." As he began picking up the scattered groceries, Anne's anger started to fade, replaced by a growing realization of her distraction. She sighed, her voice now gentler. "You're right. I wasn't paying attention either. If you could drive me home, I'd appreciate it." The man offered her a small, tentative smile. "I'm Matthew," he said, extending his hand. Anne managed a weak smile in return as they exchanged a brief handshake before heading to his car. The ride home was filled with light conversation, their earlier tension easing away. Matthew tried to make small talk, but his words soon took a personal turn. "You know, your husband is very fortunate. You're a remarkable woman. Not everyone is so lucky. My wife left me, you see. Just me and my little girl now." Anne's heart sank at his words, her deep pain rising to the surface. The question of children had long been a source of sorrow for her. She and her husband had tried for years, but motherhood had eluded her. The wound was too raw, too personal to share with a stranger. "No, we don't have children," she replied curtly, her voice tight with unspoken emotion. Soon they arrived at her home, an elegant, sprawling estate behind a tall gate. Matthew glanced over at Anne, sensing the shift in her mood but not quite understanding its cause. "Anne, I hope I didn't offend you. If I did, I'm sorry." Anne shook her head, forcing a smile. "No, it's nothing. I'm just a bit on edge today. Thank you for the ride." As she unloaded the groceries, the weight of her loneliness pressed down on her. Her husband, once her closest confidant, had grown distant, often staying late at work. The calls she made to him went unanswered more and more frequently. Tonight, on her milestone birthday, she had hoped for something different. But as she set the table alone, her heart ached with the realization that she might have to celebrate this special day without him. The joyous anticipation she had felt earlier was now overshadowed by a deep, lingering sadness. The doorbell rang and Anne, still reeling from the evening's earlier events, approached the intercom. On the screen, she saw the familiar, warm faces of Gwen and Wes, their smiles radiating through the small monitor. These two had been their steadfast friends since college, a bond forged over years of shared experiences. They were, in truth, the only people Anne and Christopher had ever truly let into their lives. Christopher had always been fiercely private, preferring to keep the world at arm's length, save for these cherished friends from their youth. "Anne, you look stunning." "I swear you haven't aged a day past 25, Gwen exclaimed as they entered, her eyes sparkling with genuine admiration. "You are just as radiant as ever." "Happy birthday, my dear." We followed, presenting Anne with a breathtaking bouquet, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the somber mood that had been lingering in the house. "And where's our hard-working Christopher? Is he still not home?" Anne forced a smile, her heart heavy. "You know how it is with him, always another urgent project, another meeting, another business matter." Gwen's brow furrowed, her concern palpable. "I don't understand how you manage, Anne. It seems like you're always alone in this big house. Have you ever thought about going back to work? Wes is searching for a new specialist, and as you know, finding a good architect is as rare as finding a skilled surgeon. I still remember how you were the best in our course." "I'd love to, truly, but you know how Christopher feels about it," Anne replied, her voice tinged with resignation. Gwen's eyes flashed with a mixture of frustration and sympathy. "Anne, forgive me for being blunt, but I have to say what's on my mind. Christopher is being incredibly selfish, and you're allowing it. Can't you see he's turned you into little more than a housekeeper? Meanwhile, he goes about his life however he pleases. It's convenient for him, sure, but what about you?" Anne felt a knot tightening in her chest, but she pushed it down, determined to maintain the evening's fragile peace. "My dears, I'm so happy to have you here. Please, let's sit down and enjoy the dinner. I'm sure Christopher will join us soon enough," she said, guiding them toward the festively set table, hoping to shift the focus away from the brewing tension. As the evening wore on, the group settled into the comforting rhythm of reminiscing about their student days, laughter occasionally breaking through the undercurrent of unease. But just as the mood began to lighten, the front door creaked open, and Christopher finally appeared. His face was a mask of seriousness, and the smile he offered was more out of social obligation than genuine warmth. "Christopher, you should have been here earlier," Gwen said, unable to hold back her frustration. "It's been ages since we've all been together, and today's Anne's birthday. And where are the flowers for your wife, the woman you love?" Christopher's expression hardened slightly, a flicker of irritation passing over his features. "It's good to see you too, Gwen, but you know how it is, work doesn't wait." "Wes, I'm sure you understand," he replied, his tone making it clear he wasn't in the mood for lectures. "I didn't have time to get flowers. I came as quickly as I could. Happy birthday, Anne." Anne took the small jewelry box he handed her, her smile faltering as she opened it. Inside was another expensive piece of jewelry, something she had received every year without fail, and yet it felt like little more than a hollow gesture. "Thank you, dear," she murmured, her heart heavy with the weight of unmet expectations. The atmosphere around the table lifted slightly with Christopher's presence, though it was punctuated by the constant buzzing of his phone. Each interruption dragged him further away from the group, leaving Anne to fend off the creeping loneliness that threatened to engulf her once more. As the evening drew to a close, and after a final round of forced pleasantries, Gwen and Wes said their goodbyes. The door closed behind them, and the house was once again swallowed by silence, leaving Anne alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that the life she had built was far from the one she had dreamed of. As Anne quietly cleared the table, the clinking of dishes was the only sound in the room. Christopher remained engrossed in his phone, his attention seemingly miles away. The silence between them was heavy, filled with words unspoken. When the last dish was finally put away, Anne turned to face him, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Christopher, don't you think that even when you're here, you're not present? It's like your mind is always somewhere else." Without even looking up from his phone, Christopher responded dismissively, "Don't start. I'm working, okay?" Anne's heart sank at his cold reply. She swallowed hard, holding back the tears that threatened to spill over. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. With a heavy heart, she turned away and walked to the bedroom, each step feeling like a weight pulling her down. Once she was alone, the tears she had been holding back finally came, and she wept, her body shaking with the force of her sadness. Despite being married, she felt utterly alone, as if she were invisible in her own home. The loss of her father at a young age had left a void in her life, one that her distant relationship with her stepfather had never filled. And now, despite having Christopher, that emptiness had returned, more profound than ever. The only thing keeping her afloat were her friends, who had stood by her through thick and thin. Without them, she wasn't sure how she would survive this overwhelming loneliness. Anne's thoughts drifted back to the conversation she had with Gwen and Wes the night before. The idea of going back to work began to take root in her mind. Maybe it was time to do something for herself, something that would give her life more purpose and, perhaps, ease the loneliness that had become her constant companion. The next morning, Anne awoke early, but the familiar comfort of her husband's presence was absent. A sense of dread settled in her chest, and a small voice in her head told her something was wrong. With a sinking feeling, she tiptoed toward Christopher's study. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she saw him lying on the couch, asleep under his jacket. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him, questions swirling in her mind. What was happening to them? What had gone so wrong in their marriage? After showering and dressing, Anne went downstairs, her mind still racing. She found Christopher sitting in the living room, staring out the window with a distant expression, a cup of coffee cradled in his hands. He didn't seem to notice her presence at first, lost in his thoughts. When she softly greeted him, he flinched as if startled. "You've been acting strange lately, Christopher. What's going on? You slept in the office last night. Are you avoiding me? Is it work? What's troubling you?" Anne's voice trembled as she finally voiced the fears that had been gnawing at her. Christopher's response came in a calm, almost indifferent tone. "We need to talk." Anne's heart skipped a beat. The words "we need to talk" were never a good sign. But she steeled herself, determined to have her say, "Yes, I wanted to talk too. I've been thinking. I know you might not like it, but I've decided I want to start working again. I need something." But before she could finish, Christopher interrupted, his voice still flat, devoid of emotion. "I've fallen in love with another woman. She's pregnant, and we're expecting a child." Anne's world shattered in that instant. The words hung in the air, each one a dagger plunging deep into her heart. The pain was so sudden, so overwhelming, that for a moment she couldn't breathe. She stood there, frozen, as if time had stopped, the reality of his confession sinking in. Everything she had feared, everything she had tried to push away, had come crashing down on her in the most brutal way possible. Anne's world spun as her vision blurred, the room closing in around her. Her legs felt like they could no longer support her, and she swayed, gripping the back of a chair for balance. But how long has this been going on? She managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would shatter what little remained of her composure. Christopher sighed, his tone cold and indifferent. "Does it matter, Anne? If you must know, I found out about the pregnancy yesterday. I didn't think it was necessary to spoil your birthday with the news." Anne's heart broke at his words, and she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling as tears began to stream down her face. "Thank you for not ruining my birthday." Christopher rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by her tears. "Let's not get dramatic, Anne. There's no need for hysterics." "But don't you care about my feelings at all?" Anne's voice cracked with pain, each word a desperate plea for some sign that the man she loved still had a heart. Christopher's eyes hardened, and his voice rose in anger. "And what about my feelings, Anne? I'm 40 years old. All of my friends and colleagues have families, children. What do we have? Nothing. I've waited long enough." Anne's tears turned to bitter sobs as she felt the weight of his accusation. "How dare you blame me for not having children? You have no idea what I've been through: the doctors, the treatments, the hope, and the heartbreak." Christopher's face remained impassive, his voice cutting through her pain like a knife. "Stop this theatrical display. There's no need for a tragedy here. People get divorced every day, and they move on. I'm going to be a father soon, Anne, and I'm finally going to be happy. Tonight, when I return, we'll discuss the details of our divorce." Without another word, he turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him with a finality that echoed in the silent house. The moment he left, Anne's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, her body racked with sobs of pain and humiliation. The life she had known, the future she had hoped for, lay in ruins around her. The man she had built her life with had ripped it all away in a matter of minutes, leaving her to pick up the shattered pieces. Meanwhile, Christopher felt a twisted sense of relief as he drove away. The weight of his secret was finally lifted, and now he could move on to what he believed would be a better, happier life. His first stop was Ellen's apartment, the place he had been using to escape the life he had with Anne. He planned to tell Ellen that everything was out in the open now, and that they could finally be together, free of any secrets. He let himself into the apartment with the key he had kept on him at all times, expecting to find Ellen waiting for him with open arms. But as he stepped inside, he was met with an unexpected sight. Ellen was packing, her large suitcase open on the bed, clothes and belongings strewn everywhere. His smile faltered as confusion set in. "I'm home," he called out, trying to keep the mood light, despite the unease creeping into his chest. "Why isn't anyone greeting me? And what's going on here? Are we going somewhere?" Ellen looked up, startled by his sudden appearance. "Oh, hi, darling. I didn't expect you back so soon," she replied, her tone guarded, as she continued packing. Christopher's confusion deepened. "Ellen, what are you doing? Why are you packing?" I thought we were going to start our life together now." Ellen paused, her hands lingering over a shirt she was folding. She took a deep breath before turning to face him, her expression a mix of guilt and resignation. "Christopher, we need to talk," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't expect things to move this quickly, and honestly, I've been thinking a lot about this." Christopher's heart began to race. "Thinking about what?" "I told you, I've ended things with Anne. We're getting divorced, and then we can be together." Ellen looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Christopher, I'm not sure this is what I want anymore. I didn't mean for things to get this complicated. I think I need some time to figure things out on my own." Christopher stared at her, his mind struggling to comprehend what she was saying. "Ellen, you're pregnant with our child. We've talked about this, about being a family." Ellen bit her lip, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I need to think about what's best for me. And for the baby. I need space, Christopher." Christopher felt the ground shift beneath him as the reality of her words began to sink in. The future he had envisioned, the new life he had so desperately wanted, was slipping through his fingers. "Ellen, please, don't do this. We can figure it out together." But Ellen shook her head, her decision made. "I'm sorry, Christopher. I have to go with that." She zipped up her suitcase and walked past him, leaving him standing alone in the apartment that had once been their secret haven, now just another place filled with broken dreams. Christopher's eyes twinkled with a mischievous glint as he twirled Ellen in his arms. "So, you didn't answer me," he teased. "Are we going somewhere?" Ellen pouted theatrically, her lips curving into a mock frown. Christopher raised an eyebrow, waiting for her response. "Yes," she finally said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "We're going to that lovely country house of yours, where your wife is currently living it up." Christopher's playful expression faltered, replaced by a serious frown. "Ellen, she has nowhere else to go right now. I need to make sure she's settled, to find her an apartment. I can't just throw Anne out onto the street," he explained, his tone stern yet pleading for understanding. But Ellen wasn't interested in his reasoning. "I don't care about her problems. We're a family, Christopher. Soon there will be 3 of us, and yet we're cramped in this tiny apartment while she gets to live alone in that big, beautiful house. It's not fair. Our baby needs fresh air, not this polluted city air," she argued, her voice trembling with frustration as she tenderly caressed her growing belly, using their unborn child as leverage. Christopher sighed, feeling the pressure mounting. "You're probably right," he conceded, pulling her closer. "Don't be upset, Ellen. I don't want you to stress. We'll move. I promise." Meanwhile, back at the house, Anne sat in a daze, her mind numb from the shock of Christopher's betrayal. For hours, she had been sitting on the couch, replaying his words in her head, trying to convince herself that this was all some cruel, twisted joke. "He'll come back and say it was just a prank," she whispered to herself, clinging to the hope that this nightmare wasn't real. But her heart sank when her phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. The screen displayed Christopher's name, and her pulse quickened in fear and anger. She hesitated, but then, with trembling hands, she swiped to answer. Her throat tightened, rendering her unable to speak. "Are you there?" Christopher's voice came through, cold and businesslike. "You don't have to say anything. Just listen. I found an apartment for you. You should go check it out." Anne couldn't bear to listen any longer. The coldness in his voice, the casual way he was dismissing their life together as if it meant nothing, was too much. Without a word, she hung up the phone, cutting him off mid-sentence. She knew that this wasn't a conversation to have over the phone. It deserved more respect than that. She made herself a cup of herbal tea and took it out to the terrace, the place she had always loved most about their home. The memories of happier times flooded her mind as she sat there, sipping her tea. This house had been their dream, a symbol of the life they had built together. They had been so young when they bought it, full of hope and excitement for the future. They had poured their hearts and souls into making it their sanctuary. And now, with a few cold words, Christopher was ready to erase it all, offering her some anonymous apartment as a replacement. Scoundrel, she hissed through her tears, anger and sorrow twisting inside her. The sun dipped below the horizon as evening descended, but Anne remained lost in her thoughts, unaware of the passage of time. She didn't notice when Christopher returned home, his footsteps heavy with purpose as he sought her out. He found her on the terrace, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the soft glow of the setting sun. "Anne," he began, his tone serious and impatient. "What was that about? You hung up on me and didn't answer my calls. We're adults. Let's handle this like adults. We need to part ways peacefully and amicably. I'm not holding you back." His words cut through her like a knife, each one stripping away the remnants of the life they had shared. The coldness in his voice was unbearable, as if the years they had spent together, the dreams they had shared, meant nothing to him now. Anne looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears and disbelief. "How can you be so heartless?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "After everything we've been through, How can you just discard me like this?" Christopher sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Anne, it's not about being heartless. It's about being realistic. We've grown apart, and it's time to move on. Clinging to the past isn't going to help either of us." "But I'm not just the past," Anne choked out, her voice breaking. "I'm your wife. We built a life together. How can you just walk away?" "Anne," he said, his tone firm, "this is how it has to be. It's over. There's no point in dragging this out." Anne felt a fresh wave of tears coming on, but she fought them back, realizing that nothing she said would change his mind. The man standing before her was no longer the Christopher she had fallen in love with. He was a stranger now, cold and distant, with no place in his heart for her anymore. As the reality of her situation set in, Anne felt the last remnants of hope slip away. She was alone, facing a future she had never imagined, a future without the man she had once believed would stand by her forever. And in that moment, as the darkness of the night closed in around her, she knew she would have to find a way to rebuild her life from the shattered pieces Christopher had left behind. "What do you mean?" Christopher asked, his voice laced with irritation. Anne met his gaze with a steely resolve, her pain giving way to a fierce determination. "What don't you understand? I'm not holding you back. If you want to be with your mistress, then go. I'm not going to vacate my home for her. This is my house too, and I have every right to stay here. If it comes to that, we'll sell it and divide the money. I think that's fair." Christopher's face tightened as he heard her words. "Anne, you seem to forget that this house is in my mother's name. We bought it under her name, and besides, it's still under mortgage. It can't just be sold." Anne's eyes widened in realization and then narrowed in anger. "So that's why you insisted on putting it under your mother's name. You planned this all along, didn't you? Covered your back very well. Do you remember that I sold my apartment years ago and put everything I had into this house? This was supposed to be our home." "I remember everything," Christopher replied coolly. "That's why I found you an apartment. You should go see it, and we can finalize everything, including the divorce afterward." Anne felt a cold, hard knot form in her stomach. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "Live here, in your mother's house. But know this, Christopher, in life we all answer for our actions, and you will answer for the pain you've caused me. Mark my words." The next day, Anne set out to see the apartment Christopher had arranged for her. As she drove, her mind was flooded with memories of their life together, their early years, filled with love and excitement when every challenge they faced seemed surmountable because they had each other. She thought of the sacrifices she had made, giving up her dreams to support Christopher's ambitions and helping him with complex projects when he needed her most. How had it all come to this? How had he so easily cast her aside? Anne knew the truth that neither of them spoke aloud. Their marriage had faltered because they never had children. It was a wound that had festered between them for years, unspoken but always there. How many times had she visited the best doctors, endured countless tests, taken pills, and suffered through injections, all in the desperate hope that she could give them the family they both wanted so badly. And yet, despite all their efforts, nothing had worked. The doctors could never explain why they remained childless. Christopher had never directly blamed her, but she could feel his disappointment, his growing resentment. He was convinced the fault lay with her, that she was the reason their dreams of a family had gone unfulfilled. Her thoughts darkened as she remembered the envy and pain she felt every time Christopher talked about Gwen and Wes and their thriving son. It was a reminder of everything she could never give him, everything she had failed to be. Lost in these thoughts, Anne barely noticed when she arrived at the address of her new home. She stood for a moment in front of the building, the weight of her situation pressing down on her. The apartment was on the 5th floor, and when she finally stepped inside, she found it to be surprisingly spacious and filled with light. It was nothing like the private house she had poured her heart into, but it was adequate a place where she could live comfortably, if not happily. As she walked through the rooms, her heart ached with the realization that this was where her new life would begin. A life without Christopher, without the home they had built together, without the dreams they had once shared. But Anne also knew she couldn't stay trapped in the past, mourning what was lost. She would have to find a way to rebuild, to carve out a new future for herself, even if it meant starting over in this unfamiliar place. The pain of Christopher's betrayal was still fresh, but she vowed to herself that she wouldn't let it destroy her. One way or another, she would find a way to heal and live again, on her terms. Where I started, once I end now, Anne muttered to herself as she stood amidst the scattered remnants of her life. The next day, her suitcases were nearly packed, filled only with the belongings that were truly hers. As she walked through the now empty rooms of the house, a wave of sadness washed over her. This had once been her sanctuary, a place where she thought she would find happiness, but now it was just a shell of broken dreams. Suddenly, a sharp voice broke the silence. "Christopher, what is she doing here?" The voice belonged to a young woman, standing in the doorway. She was stunning, at least 20 years younger than Anne, radiating confidence and beauty. She could have easily passed for Christopher's daughter, but Anne knew better. Anne turned slowly, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. She smiled, though it was a smile tinged with sorrow and bitterness. "I am still in my own home," darling Anne replied, her voice calm yet edged with pain. "And for your information, I am still the lawful wife of your lover. As for what you are doing here, that is indeed a good question. It amazes me how people like you, with no shame or conscience, manage to exist in this world." She then shifted her gaze to Christopher, who stood awkwardly between the two women, tension thick in the air. "I believe I made it clear that your mistress shouldn't be here before I left," Anne said, her voice firm. Christopher stiffened, his face a mask of frustration. "She is not a mistress, Anne. She is the mother of my son. And stop with the theatrics, this isn't helping anyone. We are modern people, let's behave like it," he said, his voice raised, trying to assert control over the situation. Anne let out a bitter laugh, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the young woman standing smugly beside her husband. "Very modern indeed," she retorted. "But Christopher, you've never understood people, and you're making a grave mistake now. Look at her, she has 'I'm looking for a rich daddy' written all over her." Christopher frowned, but he said nothing, his silence betraying a flicker of doubt. Ellen, however, couldn't resist rolling her eyes theatrically. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach and giggled, a sound that grated on Anne's nerves. "Girl, what is your name?" Anne asked, her tone cool but cutting. "Christopher, this girl is a natural actress. Mark my words, the surprises in your life are just beginning." Happily. As she walked through the rooms, her heart ached with the realization that this was where her new life would begin. A life without Christopher, without the home they had built together, without the dreams they had once shared. But Anne also knew she couldn't stay trapped in the past, mourning what was lost. She would have to find a way to rebuild, to carve out a new future for herself, even if it meant starting over in this unfamiliar place. The pain of Christopher's betrayal was still fresh, but she vowed to herself that she wouldn't let it destroy her. One way or another, she would find a way to heal and live again, on her terms. "Where I started, once I end now," Anne muttered to herself as she stood amidst the scattered remnants of her life. The next day, her suitcases were nearly packed, filled only with the belongings that were truly hers. As she walked through the now empty rooms of the house, a wave of sadness washed over her. This had once been her sanctuary, a place where she thought she would find happiness, but now it was just a shell of broken dreams. Suddenly, a sharp voice broke the silence. "Christopher, what is she doing here?" The voice belonged to a young woman, standing in the doorway. She was stunning, at least 20 years younger than Anne, radiating confidence and beauty. She could have easily passed for Christopher's daughter, but Anne knew better. Anne turned slowly, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. She smiled, though it was a smile tinged with sorrow and bitterness. "I am still in my own home, darling," Anne replied, her voice calm yet edged with pain. "And for your information, I am still the lawful wife of your lover. As for what you are doing here, that is indeed a good question. It amazes me how people like you, with no shame or conscience, manage to exist in this world." She then shifted her gaze to Christopher, who stood awkwardly between the two women, tension thick in the air. "I believe I made it clear that your mistress shouldn't be here before I left," Anne said, her voice firm. Christopher stiffened, his face a mask of frustration. "She is not a mistress, Anne. She is the mother of my son. And stop with the theatrics, this isn't helping anyone. We are modern people, let's behave like it," he said, his voice raised, trying to assert control over the situation. Anne let out a bitter laugh, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the young woman standing smugly beside her husband. "Very modern indeed," she retorted. "But Christopher, you've never understood people, and you're making a grave mistake now. Look at her, she has 'I'm looking for a rich daddy' written all over her." Christopher frowned, but he said nothing, his silence betraying a flicker of doubt. Ellen, however, couldn't resist rolling her eyes theatrically. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach and giggled, a sound that grated on Anne's nerves. "Girl, what is your name?" Anne asked, her tone cool but cutting. "Christopher, this girl is a natural actress. Mark my words, the surprises in your life are just beginning." At that moment, Anne's phone buzzed with the sound of an incoming SMS. She glanced at the screen and sighed with relief the taxi had arrived at the gates. Without another word, she grabbed the handles of her two large suitcases and began to roll them towards the exit. Christopher watched her go, a pang of sadness twisting in his chest. As much as he tried to convince himself that this was for the best, that he was moving on to a better life, something deep inside him felt wrong. There was an unpleasant heaviness in his soul, and for a fleeting moment he wanted to stop this madness, to call out to Anne and undo the damage. But before he could act on that impulse, Ellen's voice cut through his thoughts. "Christopher, my dear, something hurts badly in my lower abdomen," Ellen complained, her voice filled with exaggerated concern. Christopher snapped back to reality, his moment of doubt vanishing as he rushed to her side. "My dear, you shouldn't worry. Just rest and stay calm, as the doctor advised. Remember," he said, his voice soothing as he gently guided her to sit down. As Anne walked out of the house, she kept her head held high, clinging to her dignity despite the deep wounds in her heart. The sight of her husband, the man who had once vowed to cherish her, now lavishing care and attention on the woman who had destroyed their marriage, was almost too much to bear. She couldn't fathom what the future held for her, and the uncertainty was terrifying. But she knew one thing: she could not stay in a place where she was no longer valued, where love had turned to indifference, and where her once bright future had dimmed to darkness. As she stepped into the taxi, she glanced back at the house one last time, tears threatening to spill over. This was the end of one chapter, but she told herself it didn't have to be the end of her story. She had faced pain before, and she would face it again. And though the path ahead was unclear and fraught with fear, Anne knew she had no choice but to walk it, one step at a time. As the taxi pulled away from what was once her home, Anne let the tears she had been holding back flow freely. The weight of everything that had happened crashed down on her, and she couldn't stop the sobs that escaped her lips. The taxi driver, a kind-looking older man, glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help?" he asked gently, his voice filled with genuine sympathy. Anne wiped at her tears, though they kept coming. "I'm sorry," she managed to say, her voice breaking. "I just couldn't hold back anymore. My husband, He brought his pregnant mistress into our home, and, well, that's why I'm here." The driver shook his head, his expression one of dismay. "You know," he began, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience, "I can't imagine a woman as beautiful as you being replaced so easily. Your husband is a fool." Anne gave a sad, bitter laugh. "But where is that beauty? I'm already 40. He found himself a younger girl, someone who hasn't seen the years I have." The driver's eyes softened as he glanced at her again. "Dear lady, 40 is just a number. It's the perfect age to love, to live, and to thrive. As for youth, well, it's often overvalued. Those young girls may have youth, but it's fleeting, and many times they lack the wisdom and grace that only come with time. I'm 67, and trust me, as someone who's lived a long life, you'll find that things will turn out fine for you. And when they do, mark my words, your husband will come back. But when he does, will you even want him? It feels like the end of the world now, but soon enough, you'll look back on this moment with indifference. You might even laugh about it someday." Anne listened to the driver's words, and for the first time since the chaos of the past few days, she felt a small spark of hope kindle in her heart. His kindness and wisdom were like a balm to her wounded spirit, and she found herself truly grateful for this stranger's support. In the weeks that followed, Anne threw herself into arranging her new life. The apartment, though spacious and comfortable, could never replace the warmth and familiarity of the home she had shared with Christopher. But she made do, slowly turning the sterile space into something more personal, more hers. The transition wasn't easy. The loneliness was overwhelming at times, and the memories of happier days haunted her. But Anne was not alone in her struggle. Gwen and Wes, her childhood friends who had always stood by her, were there to lift her spirits. Wes, without hesitation, offered her a position in his company, and Anne was quick to accept, eager for the distraction and the chance to rebuild her life. At work, Anne found herself welcomed warmly by the team. She had been nervous about re-entering the workforce after so many years, but her fears quickly dissipated as she settled into her role. The work was challenging, and she relished the opportunity to put her skills to use again. When she received her first paycheck in years, the sense of accomplishment filled her with a joy she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a tangible reminder that she was capable, that she could stand on her own 2 feet. Gwen became a frequent visitor at Anne's new apartment, bringing laughter and companionship that brightened her days. Wes, on his part, cut off all ties with Christopher. He had only called him once after learning about the betrayal, and his disappointment in his old friend was clear. We refused to support Christopher's actions, and instead, he focused on helping Anne through this difficult time. One evening, as the office was emptying, Anne found herself staying late. The team was working on an urgent project, one that seemed impossible to complete on time. We had been growing increasingly anxious, convinced that they were going to miss the deadline and lose the client to a competitor. But Anne, drawing on the knowledge and skills she had honed over the years, threw herself into the work with determination. Hour after hour, she labored over the details, refusing to let the project slip through their fingers. She thought back to her university days, to the lessons she had learned, and applied them with precision. By the time she finally finished, it was late, well past the time she would normally have left the office. But the project was done, and as she placed the completed work on Wes's desk, a deep sense of satisfaction filled her. As Anne left the office that night, walking through the quiet streets, she felt a new sense of purpose. She had faced so much heartache, but she was still standing, still moving forward. The words of the taxi driver echoed in her mind, and she smiled to herself, realizing that perhaps he was right. This wasn't the end, it was a new beginning, and she was ready to embrace whatever the future held. The night air was damp and cold, and the wind cut through Anne's coat like a knife. She shivered, cursing herself for not arranging a taxi ahead of time. The streets were almost deserted, and as she scanned the area, she noticed the headlights of a parked car on the other side of the street. The road was empty, so she decided to take a shortcut and cross the 4 lanes. Just as she stepped onto the pavement, a car suddenly appeared from around the corner, its headlights blinding her. The screech of brakes filled the air, and Anne stumbled in fright, narrowly avoiding disaster. "Are you crazy? Have you got a death wish or something?" a man's voice shouted as he jumped out of the car. Anne, still shaken, snapped back, "It's you who's crazy. Watch where you're driving," though deep down, she knew it was her fault for crossing so carelessly. The man paused, and then his tone shifted from anger to a kind of amused familiarity. "Well, what do you know? An old acquaintance. Hello there. Seems like we keep running into each other, literally." The voice struck a chord in Anne's memory, but the glare of the headlights still obscured the man's face. "Let me help you up," he offered, extending a hand toward her. "Thanks, but I've already been helped enough today," Anne grumbled as she rubbed her bruised knees and hands. "Tomorrow's an important day for me. I'm supposed to present a project to a client, and now you've gone and messed everything up." The man laughed, a light, mocking sound. "Maybe you should tell the client the truth, that you've got a bad habit of throwing yourself in front of cars." Anne shot him a glare. "You're a bore." And proud of it, he shot back with a grin. "Look, either get in the car and I'll take you home, or get off the road. I'm in a hurry." Anne hesitated, her pride battling with practicality. "Fine," she huffed. "But only because you're responsible for almost running me over." She got up from the cold, wet asphalt and slid into the passenger seat. When the driver turned to face her, she gasped in recognition. "You, Matthew, if I remember your name correctly." "Yeah, that's me," he replied, smiling warmly. "I recognized you right away." And they both laughed, the tension of the moment easing as they recalled their previous encounter. "What are the odds?" Matthew mused. "Twice now, you've almost ended up under my wheels. I remember where to take you from last time." But Anne's smile faded, replaced by a sadness that tugged at her heart. "A lot has changed in my life since then," she said quietly. "I'm not at that address anymore. I live in one of the new apartment buildings near the South Bridge now." Matthew's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. But hey, it's just an address. Life goes on, right?" Anne nodded, appreciating his attempt to lighten the mood, but the weight of her recent past still lingered heavily on her. As Matthew drove, she couldn't help but think about how much had changed in such a short time. Yet, as she sat beside him, something about his easygoing nature gave her a small sense of comfort, like maybe, just maybe, things would be okay again. "Yes, I know. So it turns out we're neighbors now," Matthew said with a warm smile. "Pardon my curiosity, but why did you move from a house to an apartment?" "My daughter and I are dreaming of moving into a house someday. The air's cleaner and everything feels different." Anne sighed, a hint of sadness flickering in her eyes. "I divorced my husband. He bought me this apartment, so I moved." Matthew's smile faltered, his expression turning sympathetic. "I'm sorry to hear that. I thought you had a happy family not too long ago." Anne's voice was tinged with bitterness as she replied, "That's all in the past now. I couldn't have children with my husband, but his mistress got pregnant. Now they live in what was our home, enjoying life, while I'm in this apartment. So, there you go. I've satisfied your curiosity. Let's just be quiet now. I have an important day at work tomorrow." Matthew was quiet for the rest of the ride, his expression thoughtful. When they arrived at Anne's building, he turned to her and smiled softly. "Well, now that I know we're neighbors, I hope this isn't the last time we run into each other, though I'd prefer it under better circumstances." "Thank you for the ride," Anne said, managing a small smile. That night, as she lay in bed, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept drifting back to the work she had done on the project and to Matthew. There was something about him, his kindness, his easygoing nature, that made her feel a sense of comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she found herself hoping their paths would cross again. The next morning, Anne awoke with a start. She glanced at the clock and her heart raced. "I overslept." "Not today," she groaned, scrambling out of bed. She rushed around her apartment, trying to get ready as quickly as possible. Within 10 minutes she was dressed, her lashes were touched up, a hint of blush brightened her cheeks, and her long hair was tied back in a tight bun. But she cursed herself for not calling a taxi in advance. Now she'd have to waste precious time waiting for a car. As she stepped outside, hoping to spot a taxi quickly, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Good morning, neighbor." Turning around, she breathed a sigh of relief. "Matthew, help me. I'm late for an important meeting." She dashed toward his car, where he was already waiting. "I was working late on a project last night. It's critical for my future and the company's reputation. The client is extremely picky, and only I know the nuances of the project. I'm the only one who can convince them that our work is the right fit." Matthew chuckled, amused by her urgency. "Well, how can I refuse a beautiful woman in distress? By the way, I'm also in a hurry for an important meeting. It's not far from where you almost got run over yesterday," he teased lightly, noting her natural beauty, even with minimal makeup. Anne, desperate, didn't hesitate. "Matthew, anything you want, just please let's go." With a playful grin, Matthew agreed. "I have one condition, though we have lunch together sometime." "Deal." "Now let's get going," Anne exclaimed. As they pulled up to the office, Anne practically leaped out of the car and hurried inside. Matthew watched her rush away with a smile, silently wondering what kind of man would willingly let such a remarkable woman slip out of his life. After parking the car, he made his way toward the same office building, but he lingered, not wanting to disturb her focus. Inside, Anne rushed into the office, slightly out of breath, but grateful she had made it on time. "Phew, I got here in time. Wes, did you look over the project? I worked late into the night, and I think I've covered everything. There are some concerns since the construction is planned by the river. I found a solution to the flooding problem." She grabbed a pencil from the desk and quickly sketched out her ideas on the blueprints spread before them. We studied her work, his eyes lighting up with appreciation. "Anne, this is impressive. You've gone above and beyond. This should put the client's concerns to rest." Relief washed over Anne as she nodded. "I'm glad you think so. I know how important this is for us." Just as they finished discussing the details, Anne's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Matthew. "Good luck with the meeting today. Let's plan that lunch soon, my treat." A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips as she tucked her phone away. Despite everything, something about this new chapter in her life didn't seem so daunting anymore. For a moment, Wes was caught off guard, his face lighting up with genuine admiration. "Anne, you're an absolute miracle. You managed to accomplish in one evening what my best specialists couldn't figure out. My dear Anne, the client will be here any minute, and all my hope rests on you. Will you present the project?" "Of course, don't worry. I'll handle everything at the highest level," Anne reassured him confidently. But then, a familiar voice echoed through the room, and Anne felt her knees nearly buckle in surprise. "Sorry for being late," the voice said. Turning around, Anne's eyes widened as she recognized the speaker. "Matthew, what are you doing here?" she asked, barely able to mask her shock. Matthew smiled warmly. "What a pleasant surprise, Anne. I suppose I'm the picky client who kept you up late working last night." Wes, initially tense, quickly relaxed as he noticed the easy rapport between Anne and Matthew. the situation felt unexpectedly lighthearted. "Good day, Mr. Foy," Wes greeted, extending his hand. "It seems you and Anne are already acquainted." "Good day," Matthew replied, shaking Wes's hand. "Yes, Anne and I are neighbors and friends. I'm sure I'll be impressed with everything in the project, so let's proceed with the presentation." The meeting proceeded in a positive and productive atmosphere. Matthew was thoroughly impressed by Anne's professionalism and the level of detail in her work. To be honest, Matthew confessed, I had approached another company with a similar request, but their project was a complete failure. They couldn't come up with a viable solution for the seasonal flooding issues, but you, Anne, nailed it. Anne, slightly embarrassed, replied, "It's not just my doing, our entire team worked on the project." "But your touch made all the difference," Anne, Matthew said with a sincere smile. "I'd like to invite you to visit the site where the house will be built. There are a few details I'd like to discuss in person. Would tomorrow work for you?" Anne blushed, her gaze shifting to Wes for approval. Wes, smiling broadly, said, "Well, Anne, you've built a strong understanding with the client. Congratulations, you'll lead this project through to the end." Anne's heart lifted throughout the day, her mood buoyed by the positive turn of events. Everything in her life seemed to be gradually improving. Thoughts of her ex-husband, who had betrayed her, were few and far between. The way Anne looked at Matthew did not go unnoticed by Wes, who had been her friend for many years. Matthew himself didn't hide his growing affection for Anne, and Wes, sincerely wishing her happiness, trusted her with this significant project, knowing how important it was for her at this time. As the workday ended, Anne left the office, and as she looked around, she couldn't shake the feeling that Matthew was nearby. "Anne, what are you, 20 years old?" she muttered to herself, chastising her thoughts as she prudently headed to the crosswalk. The next morning, as agreed, Anne waited for Matthew at the entrance to her building. She hated being late, so when she spotted Matthew approaching in the distance, she felt a twinge of impatience. "Hello, Matthew," she called out, trying to keep her irritation in check. "I've been waiting for you in the rain for half an hour." Matthew approached with an apologetic expression. "Hello, Anne. I'm so sorry, truly. My daughter, Eva, got sick last night. Her temperature spiked, and I had to take care of her. I haven't saved your number yet, so I couldn't warn you. I'm afraid we'll have to cancel our trip today." Anne's irritation melted away, replaced by concern. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Matthew. Is there anything I can do to help?" Matthew looked at her with gratitude. "Actually, yes, I could use your help. I don't want to leave EVA alone, even for a moment. I need to run to the pharmacy. How about this, you go home, and I'll quickly grab what she needs. But first, let me give you my number, and if you need anything, or if there's anything else I can do, don't hesitate to call me anytime. Now tell me your apartment number so I can drop off the medicine after I get it." Anne quickly exchanged numbers with Matthew and gave him her apartment number. As he hurried off to the pharmacy, she felt a warm flutter in her chest. Despite the unexpected turn of events, there was something comforting about the connection they were building. It was as if, after all the pain and turmoil, a new chapter in her life was beginning, one that held the promise of something bright and hopeful. Anne was touched by Matthew's openness and the earnestness in his voice. "You're helping me out," she said gratefully as she handed him the bag with fruits and medicine. 15 minutes later, Anne followed Matthew into his modestly furnished apartment. "Take off your coat and come in, please," he said warmly. "Eva's fallen asleep. I made tea. You're all wet, and I wouldn't want you to get sick because of me." Matthew helped Anne with her coat and guided her to the kitchen. As they settled down with their tea, Anne was struck by the simplicity of Matthew's home. Despite the large sums of money involved in his project, his apartment seemed quite modest. During their conversation, Matthew shared more about his life and his daughter, Eva. She's only 5. He explained, and she's been through a lot. She was born with a congenital heart defect. Thankfully, she had a successful operation when she was 1, but she still struggles with asthma. The doctors say fresh, clean air might help her condition, which is why I'm so determined to build this house by the river. Anne listened intently, touched by Matthew's dedication and the challenges he faced. "You're the only one who could solve that problem," she said. "Matthew, if you don't mind me asking, what do you do for a living? It must be tough managing everything on your own." Matthew sighed, his expression a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "It is challenging, especially when Eva's unwell. When she's healthy, she goes to daycare, and I work as a mechanic at a technical service station." Anne was surprised. "How do you manage everything?" "I'm used to it," Matthew replied. "I have to manage because there's no one else to help. When Eva's well, I work hard, and we make it work. I'm looking forward to finishing the house. My childhood friend runs a sawmill near the plot, and he's offered me a job as a woodsman. It's something I know well." "Really? Do you have experience with that kind of work?" Anne asked. "Yes, my father ran a wood processing business. After he died, I wanted to leave the small town and go to the city. I used the money from the sale of the business to support myself and EVA. I trained as a mechanic because that was what I could do in the city. But I've always loved forestry. And once the house is built, I plan to return to it. I hope things will get easier then." Anne admired Matthew's resilience and dedication. The conversation made her appreciate him even more, and she could see that his love for EVA and his passion for his work drove him forward. As they continued their chat, Anne felt a growing connection to Matthew, finding solace in their shared conversation and mutual understanding. Anne was deeply touched by Matthew's warmth and simplicity. As they chatted, she found herself drawn to his genuine nature, his sense of humor, and the way he spoke about his daughter. She especially admired his sincere eyes and the way he interacted with EVA. When EVA entered the kitchen, Anne was charmed by the little girl's curiosity and sweetness. "Hello, Anne? I'm EVA. Very pleased to meet you," the child said, her bright eyes full of wonder. "Eva, you're a very cute and beautiful girl," Anne responded warmly, feeling an instant connection with the child. Eva's innocent question, "Do you have a daughter?" made Anne's heart ache a little. "Unfortunately, no. I would like to have a smart daughter, like you," she replied with genuine feeling. Matthew, sensing a chance to bond further, suggested, "Well, if EVA agrees, I propose we order pizza and watch an interesting movie. We have an unplanned day off tomorrow anyway." Eva's eyes lit up with excitement. "Hooray! Will Anne also be with us?" Matthew turned to Anne with a hopeful expression. "Well, if you accept me into your team, I would be happy to join you," Anne said, her heart swelling as Eva hugged her tightly. From that day on, Anne, Matthew, and EVA formed a close-knit trio. Anne became a beloved guest in their home, and the time they spent together was filled with joy and laughter. They played board games, watched educational films about animals, and enjoyed outings to amusement parks and zoos. The house construction was moving along swiftly, and Anne's new projects at work were thriving. Her expertise was now sought after by her colleagues, and she embraced her role with enthusiasm. The bond between Anne, Matthew, and EVA grew stronger with each passing day, creating a new, fulfilling chapter in their lives. Anne had come to see Matthew and EVA as her new family. The support and companionship they provided were a balm for her soul, helping her heal from the past and find happiness in the present. As their friendship deepened, Anne realized that she had found something truly special, people who valued her for who she was, and a new sense of belonging she had longed for. One fateful morning, as Wes walked into the office, an unmistakable shift in his demeanor was evident. Anne, ever observant and deeply intuitive, immediately sensed the change in him and resolved to uncover the source of his unease. With a reassuring smile and a steaming cup of coffee in hand, Anne approached the door of Wes's office and gently knocked. "Wes, may I come in?" "I've brought coffee," she said, her voice infused with genuine concern. We looked up with a weary smile, his eyes betraying a trace of fatigue. "Hello, Anne. Please, come in." "It's always a pleasure to see you," he replied, though the warmth in his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Anne stepped inside, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right? You seem troubled," she inquired, her voice laced with empathy. Wes sighed deeply, the weight of his troubles evident in his posture. "Yes, Anne, you've noticed correctly. Something unfortunate has occurred. Remember Christopher, the one who lent me some money? He's facing significant difficulties with his business and other personal issues. To make matters worse, Ellen, who recently had a baby boy, has pressured him to return the money sooner than planned. But that's not the end of it. He also instructed me to inform you that the apartment you're residing in, well, he has a new family now and will no longer be covering the loan." Anne's heart sank at the revelation. I should have anticipated this. I was already taken aback that the property was financed. Christopher had assured me he would make regular payments, and once again, I placed my trust in him only to be betrayed. "I'll settle the debt within a week, Wes." "I can't fathom how he could treat you this way. After everything, I sold my apartment and invested every last cent into the house where he now lives with another woman. I was furious and wanted to confront him, but he cowardly refused to meet. He insisted I transfer the money to his account and made it clear that, since I supported you, there was nothing more to discuss." Wes's face showed a mixture of sympathy and admiration. "Anne, don't fret about the apartment. It's registered under my name, and I'm financially stable with a supportive boss. I'll handle the loan myself. This experience has been a harsh lesson. I was naive, too young, and never imagined things would end like this. But now that Christopher has a son, he has new responsibilities. He always wanted children, so it's only natural he'd focus on his future." Anne offered a bittersweet smile, her eyes reflecting both sadness and hope. "Oh, Wes, do you still feel sympathy for him after everything he's done? But regardless, you're not alone in this. Gwen and I are here for you. Your dedication and hard work have greatly contributed to our company's success. As a token of our appreciation, I'm pleased to give you a well-deserved raise." Anne's eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you so much. May I leave a bit early today? Work is all wrapped up, and I'd like to stop by a store on my way home. It's my birthday today, and Matthew and I have picked out a gift. We just need to collect it." Wes's eyes twinkled with interest. "Oh, you've chosen the gift with Matthew? Things seem serious." Anne chuckled softly. "I'm not sure. I believe in trusting fate if it offers a second chance. Matthew is a wonderful person, and Eva is such a delightful child. They've brought a new light into my life." Wes's smile broadened, his eyes reflecting genuine happiness for her. "Anne, your eyes are sparkling with joy. Don't miss this chance for happiness." Anne nodded, her heart full of warmth. "You're right, Wes. Trusting fate has been rewarding. Thank you for your support. I'm truly grateful to have you and Gwen by my side. Without you, I would have been overwhelmed by loneliness." A year later, Anne and Matthew stood on the terrace of their newly built home, admiring the view of the river. "Wow, you've done a remarkable job. The house is stunning, and your flood prevention measures are perfect. When do you plan to move in?" We marveled at the breathtaking scenery. Anne, her hands gently resting on her burgeoning belly, glanced at Matthew with eyes full of joy. "We'll move in when the time feels right," she said softly. Matthew wrapped his arms around her, pressing a tender kiss to her cheek, sharing in the profound happiness that now filled their lives. There's just a bit more to wrap up. The workers are finishing the final touches inside the house, and once that's complete, we'll be ready. For now, Anne and I have decided to stay in the city until the baby arrives. Afterward, we'll consider our moving options." We beamed with genuine enthusiasm. "You've done an outstanding job, both of you. I'm thrilled for the new chapter in your lives." Anne, her voice filled with a deep sense of contentment, replied, "Wes, I never imagined a person could feel such overwhelming happiness." Matthew, his eyes glowing with pride, responded, "You're a shining example, Wes. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you ever need anything. Anne's family is my family, that's our guiding principle." Wes's smile widened, his voice rich with warmth. "Thank you, Matthew. Your offer means a lot. I'm diving into woodworking now. It feels like a perfect fit for me, so I plan to start a local production soon." "That sounds fantastic, but don't even think about taking Anne away from us," Wes chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mirth. Matthew laughed along. "Don't worry, Wes. I wouldn't dream of it. You and Gwen have been incredibly supportive, and I deeply value our friendship. I'm thoroughly enjoying my work, and financial concerns are not pressing at the moment." "All right, enough business talk," Wes said, changing the subject. "Let's go see Gwen and the kids. I'm sure they're missing us." When they arrived home, they were greeted by the sight of children playing with a ball. Gwen was setting the table, having prepared a delightful spread. Meanwhile, Anne's life, once filled with heartache and betrayal, was gradually finding its balance. With Wes's assistance in resolving the apartment issue through a lawyer and her diligent mortgage payments from a well-earned salary, Anne's life was steadily improving. She married Matthew 6 months after they met, and Eva was overjoyed to have a loving mother. Their bond was warm and nurturing, envied by many. Matthew cherished Anne and valued her role in raising his daughter, while Eva looked forward to the arrival of a new sibling. Together, they shopped for baby items, and Anne couldn't envision her life without Matthew and Eva. One day, while Matthew was out of town, Anne went for a routine checkup at the women's clinic. Gwen kindly agreed to look after Eva, knowing her son Tommy was excited to play with his new friend. Anne left the clinic feeling buoyant. The baby was developing well, the heartbeat was strong, and no complications were detected despite her age. On her way out, Anne decided to visit the mall to pick up toys for Eva and Tommy. But as she entered the shopping center, an unexpected and uncomfortable encounter awaited her. Christopher, her ex-husband, stood frozen in shock as he saw Anne's pregnancy. Anne, how Christopher stammered, his astonishment palpable. Anne's voice was calm but firm. "Hello, Christopher. This isn't your concern. I heard about the birth of your son. Congratulations. I'd say it's nice to see you, but it's not. I need to go now. Goodbye, Christopher." With that, Anne continued on her way, leaving Christopher standing in stunned silence as he watched her walk away. When Christopher arrived home, his young son darted towards him with infectious excitement. Ellen, however, sat slouched on the living room couch, her eyes glued to the phone screen as if it held the answers to the world's questions. "Hey, Ellen, are we having dinner soon?" Christopher inquired from the doorway, his voice carrying a note of fatigue. Ellen barely looked up, her irritation palpable. "I asked you to transfer money to my card. Did you forget?" she snapped, dismissing Christopher's query entirely. Christopher's brow furrowed with concern. "Is that all you have to say to me? You've been acting off lately. Is everything all right?" "I'm not acting weird, Christopher. I simply don't appreciate being ignored," Ellen retorted sharply. Christopher sighed, frustration creeping into his tone. "This isn't just a request, it feels more like a demand. I'm struggling at work. We need to be careful with our finances and not splurge like we're accustomed to. You had a husband who managed money wisely. And look how that turned out. I need to update my wardrobe. I refuse to look as disheveled as my ex did." Ellen's anger flared. "Don't you dare talk about Anne. You don't deserve a fraction of her. If it weren't for our son," she trailed off, her voice seething with unspoken resentment, and headed to the playroom to attend to the baby. Realizing her harsh words, she quickly moved to the kitchen to prepare a meal for her husband, trying to mend the rift with an effort of domestic normalcy. As Christopher focused on his son, attempting to calm his rising frustration, the innocent chatter of the toddler only added to his unease. The little boy spoke of his day in his endearing, simple way ice cream, playtime with his uncle, but Christopher couldn't shake the feeling of doubt. That night, he delayed any further confrontation with Ellen, instead probing her about their day. Ellen's vague response, claiming they had stayed home all day, did little to assuage his growing suspicion. As the night wore on, Christopher found himself tormented by thoughts of Anne. The vivid memory of her, radiant and glowing with pregnancy, only intensified his jealousy. The image of her flourishing in another's company gnawed at him, fueling a restless jealousy that consumed him. The following morning, Christopher left for work with a new resolve. As he departed, he told Ellen, "I transferred the money to your card. Go ahead and update your wardrobe." Ellen's face brightened instantly, and she practically leaped into his arms, enveloping him in an embrace. "My love, thank you. I adore you so much," she exclaimed, her voice brimming with affection. Christopher's response was measured. "I'll see you tonight." He gently disentangled himself from her embrace and left the house. However, instead of heading to work, Christopher decided to shadow Ellen, driven by a growing suspicion. What he discovered was a bitter disappointment. He caught Ellen in the act of betrayal, shattering any illusion of trust. As soon as Ellen departed the house with their son, Christopher followed her discreetly. He drove with careful precision, determined not to attract her attention. His unease grew as he noticed Ellen heading towards a residential neighborhood, where she parked the car in front of a tall 10-story building. With their son cradled in her arms, she entered the building, leaving Christopher to wait and watch from a distance. Hours passed before Ellen emerged, this time accompanied by a young man carrying their son on his shoulders. Christopher's anger simmered beneath the surface, but he kept himself hidden, grappling with rising suspicions and a gnawing sense of betrayal. Meanwhile, at their newly completed dream home, Matthew and Anne were preparing for a weekend getaway with their friends, Wes and Gwen. "Matthew, I need to run back to my apartment for a moment," Anne said as she made her way towards the door. "I need to water the flowers since we'll be gone for a few days. Could you manage here? Maybe take Eva with you." "Of course, my love," Matthew replied warmly. "EVA and I will take care of it quickly." Eva eagerly accompanied her father, helping to water the flowers and humming a cheerful tune that brightened the atmosphere. A sudden knock on the door caught Anne's attention, though it was not unexpected. "It's probably Daddy," Anne said to EVA. "Please open the door, but first ask who's there." "Okay, Mama Anne. I'll check," Eva replied, scampering to the door. When she heard a stranger's voice from the other side, she quickly called out for Anne. Anne approached the door and peered through the peephole, her surprise palpable when she recognized the uninvited guest. "Christopher, what are you doing here?" Anne asked, opening the door with a mixture of confusion and guarded curiosity. "We need to talk," Christopher said, his voice laced with desperation. "I've been a fool. I'm sorry for everything I've done for you. Please, can we start over?" Anne glanced at EVA, who was busy inspecting the flowers. With a soft smile, Anne said, "Eva, why don't you make sure we watered all the flowers properly? I need to speak with this person for a few minutes." Eva nodded and went back to the task at hand, leaving Anne and Christopher alone. Anne turned her full attention to Christopher, her expression resolute. "Christopher, are you out of your mind? I've moved on with my life. I'm expecting a child with the man I love. You once claimed you were finally happy and looking forward to the birth of your son. Well, now I understand what you meant. I'm finally happy too. With a daughter and another child on the way. I don't love you anymore. I let go of you a long time ago. No, you can't, Christopher pleaded, his voice choked with desperation. I've been a fool. I'm divorcing Ellen. She deceived me from the very beginning. She was with me only for the money. And the worst part, my son isn't even mine. I did a DNA test. Ellen's child is from another man, and while I was away, she was spending time with the boy's biological father. Ellen used me to support her lover, and now I'm completely alone. Please forgive me and come back to our home. Remember how happy we were there. I promise I'll love your child as if it were my own. I can't bear the thought of losing you again, Christopher implored, his eyes pleading with a mix of remorse and hope. Anne's face hardened with a blend of anger and sorrow. Now you understand how I felt when you betrayed me, Christopher. Let's be honest, I was a faithful wife. I never betrayed you. You destroyed everything yourself. The fact that we didn't have children was never my fault. You got what you deserved. And it's come back to you like a boomerang. Leave now and never dare to show your face here again. I will never come back to you. Christopher's despair was palpable. Tears welled up in his eyes as he struggled to contain his emotions. The apartment door opened, and Matthew appeared on the threshold, having inadvertently overheard the painful exchange between his wife and her ex-husband. Dear, you and Evie have been gone for a while. I wanted to make sure everything was okay, Matthew said, his voice firm but concerned. Wes and Gwen are already here, and Tommy can hardly wait for Evie. His gaze then shifted sharply to Christopher. And what are you doing here? Matthew demanded. Christopher tried to assert himself. I bought this apartment. I have the right to be here. Matthew's expression darkened. Oh, how low you've sunk. This apartment belongs to my wife and only to her. Have you forgotten what it means to be a man? What right do you have to claim anything here? Anne's voice cut through the tension. Christopher, it's best if you leave. It's all over. The weight of the moment settled heavily on Christopher. Unable to hold back his tears, he felt a profound sense of regret and loss. Forgive me, Anne, he said quietly, his voice breaking. Turning to Matthew, he added, take care of her. There's no one like Anne in the whole world. Matthew's reply was cold but resolute. Don't worry, I won't miss my chance at happiness with that. He closed the door firmly behind Christopher, turning back to his wife. Are you okay? Matthew asked, his concern evident as he enveloped Anne in a comforting embrace. Yes, everything is fine, Anne replied, her voice softening as she closed her eyes, finding solace in the arms of her beloved. The pain of the past was fading, replaced by the warmth of their shared future. Eva, it's time for us, Anne called, her voice full of warmth. With that, the little girl and her family set off for their home. As they cheerfully exited the building, unaware of the observer across the street, Christopher sat alone in his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He watched Anne and her family disappear, a profound sadness etched on his face. He knew, with a sinking heart, that he would never have her back. 3 years later, a group of joyful friends and family gathered by the riverbank, enjoying a sunny afternoon in their little piece of paradise. Matthew and Wes were engrossed in grilling, their laughter and camaraderie filling the air. Tommy and Eva busied themselves teaching the youngest member of their family how to ride a tricycle, their giggles echoing in the warm breeze. Anne and Gwen lounged on comfortable chairs by the water, soaking up the serene beauty of the day. I look at my family, Gwen, and I can hardly believe how happy I am, Anne said, her eyes reflecting pure contentment. It's almost frightening to think of how life would have been without them. "Oh, Anne, it's clear to me that this is exactly how it was meant to be. You deserve every bit of this happiness," Gwen replied, her voice tinged with sincere admiration. "I must admit, I even envy you a little in the best way. Each day feels like a honeymoon, filled with love and joy. Matthew would move mountains for you." "Yes, Gwen, it's truly like having wings," Anne agreed, her smile radiant. "Matthew is an incredible man. His business is thriving, and he's flourishing. By the way, I'm almost done with the design for your dream house. We'll be living close by and we'll get to see each other more often," she added with enthusiasm. "Ladies, the barbecue is ready. Let's eat before it gets cold," Matthew called out, his eyes twinkling with affection as he saw the beautiful, cheerful woman approaching. Wes, standing beside him, couldn't contain his excitement at the sight. "Matthew, we're so fortunate to have them in our lives," Wes said, clapping his friend on the back. Anne looked around at the scene of contentment and joy, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She was thankful for every twist and turn in her journey, both the painful and the joyous moments. Her life had transformed in ways she had never imagined possible. She had found genuine love and family happiness where she least expected it. Anne realized now that every encounter, every challenge, and every change had led her to this place of fulfillment. She understood that life offers new beginnings, even later on, and every day she cherished the laughter and love she now knew. Watching Matthew play with the children and hearing their joyful laughter, Anne offered silent thanks to fate for granting her this second chance at happiness. She loved and was loved deeply, and she now knew for certain that it was never too late to start anew. As we wrap up this heartfelt journey, let's take a moment to reflect on the powerful story we've just explored. Anne's transformation from a life of betrayal and despair to one of genuine love and fulfillment is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Through her experiences, we've witnessed the profound impact of embracing new beginnings, the importance of self-worth, and the strength found in moving forward despite adversity. We'd love to hear from you. What have you learned from Anne's story? Is there a lesson or insight that resonates with you and that you plan to incorporate into your own life? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below this video. Your perspective could inspire others on their journey. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content that touches the heart and inspires the soul. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video.